Hello, my name is Jon Freeman. I'm a PhD student at Anderson University. I've also been a full-time vocational pastor for more than 20 years. The title of my paper is Stolen Valor in the Pulpit: Implications in Taking Credit for the Ministry Accomplishments of Others. As we think about the issue of leadership and preaching, it's important to remember and to call to our mind the inseparable link between the communicator's integrity, morally and ethically, and the effectiveness and credibility of his or her message. Recently, a church in my city went through a time of turmoil as this preaching pastor was found to have plagiarized a number of messages. And not only was the church going through a real time of turmoil and had to find a new preaching pastor, the preaching pastor himself was let go, and the credibility of his ministry was significantly affected and really drew him out of ministry at least at this point in time. But also the fallout includes the fact that so much question surrounds this pastor's previous messages, many of which were probably of his own work and were perfectly legitimate. And what we've seen is, by this compromising his moral and ethical standard, which he knew was wrong, ultimately compromised his message and the effectiveness of his message. Now, there's been a lot of work done in the area of plagiarism and kind of a consistent understanding that plagiarism is wrong. We've seen many high-profile cases of people who have stolen or unduly taken credit for the intellectual property of others and passed it off as their own to be wrong. And we've seen many high-profile pastors, their ministries really derailed because of it. But there is another issue that relates to stolen valor, and that is unduly taking credit and unethically taking credit for the ministry accomplishments of others. Now, we see this sometimes in the area of politicians who take credit for the accomplishments of others. They're on the campaign trail and they take credit for all of these different things, and there's almost unanimity in their feedback right following that of, hey, there's 4 Pinocchios or 2 Pinocchios. This person has not said what is true, is trying to take credit for something that he or she did not do for the sake of building their own political brand. And unfortunately, there are pastors who right now, this week, this month, this year, who are trying to build their own brand by taking primary credit for the ministry accomplishments of others. There are men and women who are doing fantastic ministry in our cities, our communities, in our country, and around the world. They're planting churches. They're starting new nonprofits. They're starting new mission efforts. They're leaving to go to places around the world, and they're seeing all kinds of fruit, translating Bibles and all kinds of different ministry. And as all of this exciting ministry is happening, there is a tendency for pastors to take credit for those, because even based on minimal amount of input. I was not long ago, I was sitting there listening to a pastor, and he was talking about all the churches that he and his church had planted. He was urging those in his congregation to pour in money so that this church could continue to plant other churches. And I was personally aware of many of the situations in which he was talking, and I was painfully aware, as somebody sitting in that audience, that those who were primarily responsible for that church had nothing to do with this pastor and little to do with the minimal financial contribution that that church had made in their ministry. And as a result, as I sat there listening, I was painfully aware of the lack of integrity that was coming from that pastor. And even though he's not my pastor, this spurred this thought in me of stolen valor. We see stolen valor in this way that's word used in military, it's used in politics, as I've said, but as it continues to creep into our churches and in our pulpits, it's an issue that we need to continue to monitor. And in this paper, we lay out some of the issues related to that, how to spot it, what it is, and that's the substance of this paper. And at the end of the day, the point of all of this is to encourage our pastors and preachers to be continually consistent morally and ethically to a standard of moral and ethical excellence in leadership. And so that is the stolen valor in the pulpit, implications and taking credit for the ministry accomplishments of